Ghost stories. They are a staple of any good campfire, especially this time of year. And while many are written simply to send a shiver down your spine, others can be traced to actual, often tragic events and are handed down from one generation to the next. Why do we tell these tales? Is it simply a way to remember history, or is it something else? Happy Halloween! I'm Shelby Still, and tonight we are going to investigate some of the stories from eastern Kentucky and southern West Virginia in this EKB TV Halloween special, Haunted Hollows.
Mamie Thurman was born around the turn of the 20th century, and previous to her, women wore clothes that covered them from collar to ankle. And in the 20s, you had the roaring 20s. Girls started wearing short dresses, mini skirts, and smoking cigarettes and drinking. And it was during Prohibition, and she would go to the speakeasies and drink. And she was a married woman, and she started having an affair with another married guy who was a banker in town. And her predilections caught up with her. They found her sliced from ear to ear and shot in the head.
A man eventually took the blame and was convicted for Mamie Thurman's death. But, even to this day, Logan County residents believe the wrong person went to jail for the murder.
We have no idea who murdered Mamie Thurman. There was a handyman who took the fall for it, but it could have been the banker she was fooling around with. It could have been his jealous wife. It could have been her jealous husband. But she was brutalized in a way that most people today would recognize as somebody who had a lot of emotion when they killed her.
Residents believe because Mamie was involved with so many important men in the area, her murder was not investigated properly.
Her husband was a police officer, he was a deputy sheriff, and he had the skill to be able to get away with it. And it wasn't investigated very well either. It was the 20s and it was a rush to judgment, and the guy who was involved with it, who was her, the person she was having an affair with, he was a very important and powerful man in town, and so they wanted to cover it up quick.
Even now, many who travel along US 119 near 22 Mine Road say they have encountered Mamie Thurman on their trip.
And they say now that if you go to the spot where her body was found and park your car, it will roll uphill by itself.
Now we'll head to downtown Pikeville, where the city is working to restore the historic York House on Main Street. But I wonder if they know about the little girl Geraldine who used to reside inside the home. I heard neighbors still see her looking through the stained glass windows inside.
Geraldine is a very sad story. Her grandparents were Jim and Augusta York. She was born to one of their daughters, Tot Creedmoor. And when Geraldine was an infant, she had a really high fever from one of the childhood diseases that went around. And back then, of course, medicine's not like it is today. And unfortunately, it caused her to be severely brain damaged. And the way this manifested in her as she grew up was she screamed a lot. She was uncontrollable. And that's how some of the stories started about the house.
The York House has a long history of families who have lived in the home. It even has ties to the historic Hatfield and McCoy feud. Right now, the city is working to preserve that history and restore it to its original state.
We're currently standing in the York House, which was built by Colonel Dills right after the Civil War, and it was given as a wedding gift to his daughter, Augusta, when she married Jim York. So now it's referred to as the York House because of that. They were a very wealthy and prosperous family in this town, and Jim became an attorney, and it was his role as attorney where he won several offices, political offices in the county, but the most famous thing he did was he was the attorney first for the Hatfields, and then later in the Hatfield-McCoy feud, he was the attorney for the McCoys.
However, over the years, the family has taken down the tower that was once attached to the roof of the house. The tower was Geraldine's favorite room and where her voice could still be heard. Now that the tower is no more, Geraldine's screams have been silenced.
Someone say that they felt like maybe the tower had been torn down after Geraldine passed, tied to the haunting, but I don't believe that's true. I think that the tower was torn off of the house because it was leaking, as the family said, and they couldn't fix the leak, so they finally just decided to tear it off and put a normal roof on the house. But hopefully our project will add that tower back into the house.
Coming up, Haunted Hollows will travel to Prestonsburg, where soldiers are said to continue marching the battlefield where they once fought. Later on, we will visit a gravesite where the family members buried their loved one alive. Now we'll travel to Mingo County, West Virginia, where a gruesome bloodbath took place, leading to the nickname Bloody Mingo. During the 1920s, many coal miners were evicted from their homes, forcing their families to live on the streets. This happened for many weeks until one day the miners plotted against the coal company and murdered the employees in cold blood along the streets.
Sid Hatfield and a group of miners were lying in wait to ambush some Baldwin Felts detectives who were evicting some miners from their homes. And they had a conflict, and they killed 9 of the 11 Baldwin Felts detectives. And when the train came in at the end of the day at 5 o'clock, all the passengers looked out and they saw these miners beating these Baldwin Felts dead bodies and pumping bullets into their dead bodies. And they were all aghast by this. And at that time, it got the nickname Bloody Mingo.
While Bloody Mingo was filled with 9 gruesome murders, Mingo County is also known nationwide for a feud that lasted nearly 30 years, the Hatfield and McCoy feud. Many say the spirits from the feud still linger through Mingo and Pike counties.
There's been lots of bloodshed in these mountains of different kinds. You've got the Hatfield-McCoy feud, which is the most famous feud in American history. Rosanna McCoy, who had this tragic life and ended up dying at 29 years of age. Many people getting killed. It's known throughout the world as being bloody and unfortunate. And some of the descendants have told me ghost stories about seeing people in one of the houses where Rosanna had her baby.
Richardson says there are certain parts of Mingo and Pike counties you should never visit alone.
The cemetery where Randall McCoy's children are buried is probably one place you don't want to go. Another place that you don't want to go is the spot where all the Baldwin Felts detectives were murdered on the back street of Matewan. There's a lot of unquiet spirits in both those places.
The Battle of Middle Creek in Prestonsburg was just as gruesome as the murders in Mingo County, West Virginia. But instead of trying to get rid of the upper class like in Mingo, the Battle of Middle Creek was neighbor against neighbor, fighting hand-to-hand combat. After a much-needed win for the Union, the Confederates never regained the advantage and surrendered as a result of the Battle of Middle Creek.
As far as deaths on the battlefield, the deaths that are recorded are Army. The casualties, the fatalities, the wounded, but you have to stop and think, this is Eastern Kentucky, and as far as actual militias, they were home guard. I mean, there were just people off the farm that came and fought.
Debbie Beatty Manuel suspects many of the soldiers decided to stay on their stomping grounds even as they joined the afterlife. One spirit, however, is believed to stay just because he loved the area.
There are several unknown, but the one we suspect is here is Colonel Andrew Jackson May. He recruited the Confederate Army in 1860s at the May House, which is the oldest house in the valley. And he was on the battlefield. He led the Confederate forces into battle, and he was not killed here. But it's always been my assumption and understanding that as you pass, you necessarily do not go back to the last place you were. If you like somewhere, which he loved this battlefield, he fought for his country here, I firmly believe that the ghost of Andrew Jackson May is alive and well on the battlefield. We have a particular spirit, for lack of a better word, that's here, and we call him our crawler. And we think that he is an actual wounded soldier. And you can see him coming from the left to the right side in the area we call the tree line where the orchard is, and it's as if he's crawling. He's been injured and he's crawling, just dragging himself to safety. He's been seen quite a few times.
Manuel believes in the spirits so much she joined a local paranormal group in order to try to figure out why the spirits still remain in Floyd County.
I'm with Raven Paranormal Team. We're local here in Floyd County, and we do a lot of investigations here at the battlefield and other places, and we have seen and heard several things that we just cannot explain.
Coming up, we'll travel through a tunnel where many never made it through alive. And later, we will visit Pikeville, where the spirit of Octavia Hatcher is said to continue crying out from the grave. To the average person, the Dingus Tunnel in Mingo County, West Virginia may look like an ordinary driving road, but residents who travel the tunnel daily understand that it is much more than that. But what makes residents so leery of the tunnel? Could someone be in there, waiting?
The Dingus Tunnel is a railroad tunnel that was built in 1892. And during the construction of the tunnel, they used a lot of Chinese and African American workers. And every time one of the workers would die, they would just shove them over in the ditch and cover up their body and keep going. And one of the most persistent stories about the tunnel is that there was a train that was going through the tunnel. It's almost a mile long, and that train got wedged in the tunnel. And the boilers were blowing up all this steam and smoke, and it suffocated all the men on board the train and killed them, and they died inside the tunnel.
The tunnel has vastly changed since the 1800s. The Dingus Tunnel has evolved with time, converting from a railroad tunnel to a highway tunnel. One thing that hasn't changed, however, is a belief that spirits still dwell within.
And today, it's a driving tunnel, and it's slightly curved, so you have to blow your horn and flash your lights as you go through it to warn anybody on the other side. But the problem with that is all that commotion disturbs the ghosts.
As time passed, many Dingus residents claim to have witnessed something strange happening while driving through the tunnel. Thrill seekers often drive to the Dingus Tunnel, hoping to see a ghost or two.
There's lots of different stories about the Dingus Tunnel. One is that you can still hear the cries of the workers trying to get out of the tunnel. Another one is that people who have gotten caught in the tunnel, when you drive through it, you can see little flashes of their faces as you drive through the tunnel. There's also stories about people who would pick people off the train as they drove through Dingus, and those people would die. So there's many, many unquiet spirits around the Dingus Tunnel, and lots of stories about it.
After setting up their own haunted house at the Van Leer Historical Society, employees soon realized the added fixtures weren't necessary. A little girl frequently visits the building, gracing employees and spectators with her singing ability. The problem? The little girl has been dead for years.
We got a little girl that runs around the building. You can hear her running, like down the hallway, or you can hear her singing, and it's real calm singing when you hear her.
Along with the unknown child, museum director Tina Webb says the museum has other unexplained visitors frequent through the museum from time to time.
We have seen people like grown adults. We have seen, shadows. We have seen actually animals. We have seen a fox, and we have heard a horse going across the floor.
Webb says with a building over 100 years old, the spirits could be anyone, especially since this particular building has been used for nearly everything in Van Leer.
The building is 102 years old, and it was Consolidation Co's office building. And it was the post office, bank, doctor, dentist, barber, city office, jail, Masonic Lodge, all the engineers for the mines. Everybody was right here.
Webb's first encounter with the unknown happened just 6 months after she started working at the museum 14 years ago. She says someone or something pushed her into the counter while she was the only one in the building at the time.
And it didn't scare me. And this was at 10:30 at night. I was by myself leaving the museum down here, and it made me mad. It actually made me mad more than it did anything. So I found out that it was somebody that had passed away there. They were resentful, and I started giving him a job. I just said, you watch over the whole thing while I'm gone, make sure everything's safe. No problem since then.
After museum employees started taking notice of the spirits, they decided enough is enough and hired special teams to help determine why the spirits frequent the museum. Webb and many paranormal teams have decided the spirits are just trying to protect what was once theirs.
There have been different paranormal teams that's been here from all over Kentucky. And all of them sent me back evidence and caught stuff like video and audio. And we've investigated a lot, in the building, so with different teams. And we have ghost tours and ghost, investigations here.
Coming up, we will travel to a place we all know a little too well, Octavia Hatcher's grave. Has she turned her back on the city of Pikeville? We will soon find out. Have you ever wondered what it's like to be buried alive? Pikeville resident Octavia Hatcher didn't have to wonder. After being in a coma for less than 24 hours, a doctor incorrectly concluded Octavia had died, and the family was told to lay Octavia to rest. While family members suspected she would rest eternally, Octavia awoke from her sleep, trapped in the cold, dark ground.
A year after Octavia married her husband, James Hatcher, she gave birth to a baby boy, Jacob. Sadly, Jacob only lived for a day.
Octavia became very ill. She was in depression. It's not uncommon because many women go through postpartum depression. But Octavia went into a deep depression, and even her friends could not console her. She would stay in bed all day long. She would not eat, and so she became very frail and went into a coma. James, of course, being quite wealthy and well-known, called in the doctors and asked them what they could do for her. So they treated her as best they could. But by the 1st of May, they just came by and said, I'm sorry, she's gone.
Johnson explains, after the family heard the news of Octavia's passing, they immediately took action, not wanting to prolong a devastating time in their lives.
It was a hot May day, so instead of having any services, or if it were services, it was very short, and they brought her up and buried her in the Pikeville Cemetery on the very same day that she died.
However, far too late, family members realized the doctor misdiagnosed Octavia's condition.
About this time, other people in the community began going into a coma, and then with a few days convalescence, they would recover and come out of it. So that started people to thinking, oh my God, what about poor Octavia? When they opened the coffin, there was this horrific sight of her fingernails all bloody and contorted. The lining of her casket had been ripped, and so it was evident that she had at some point regained consciousness and tried to get out.
Rumors soon spread Octavia would come back and haunt those who ended her life far too soon. Thrill seekers then started hanging around Octavia's burial site to see if they could catch a glimpse of poor Octavia, especially after James Hatcher bought a life-size statue of Octavia and baby Jacob to place over their graves.
Stories started that they could come up and they would be near the statue, and they could hear the wind whistling through it. Meanwhile, standing very near it, no wind was blowing at all. It has been said that on the anniversary of her date, the statue would turn around like she was turning her back on the city of Pikeville for abandoning her or burying her alive.
Thank you for joining me on this EKB TV Halloween special, Haunted Hollows. I've enjoyed bringing the region's folklore to life and learning the history behind the spirits we have all learned to fear. Just remember, never travel alone at night. If you do, you may not be alone for long. Happy Halloween.